So we have Carol online already. She doesn't really need any introduction because she's a star of the ELT world. But for those of you who want just a little reminder, Carol Reed is an author, an ELT expert. She's been an academic manager, a teacher trainer, and she's a very successful author of children's books of ELT. So she wrote our Tiger Time series, and she wrote our new series, The Wheels, that is available all over the world. You can find information about it on our website. And she's going to be talking today about child's play, the role of play and games in teaching preschool children. So I'm just saying that so many more of you have just joined. Welcome, everyone. Can you all see me and hear me okay? If you can, please type yes in the chat box. I've seen a few messages saying that you can't hear. That is great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And another little reminder about the fact that if you missed, or if you know of a colleague who missed our webinars and might be interested, they're all available on our website, in our website archive. And this one will be recorded and shared on our website and on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, as well as the others, of course. You will all get a certificate, and you will all find information about whatever I've been mentioning, such as our Storytime with Carol corner on our website, macmillanenglish.com. So I see that there's so many of you who are joining us right now. Welcome, everyone. So we have Carol Reed in the room. Carol, if you can hear me and see me, you're very welcome to say hello to everyone.
Yeah, hi everyone. Lovely to see so many of you here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are from. Fantastic, fantastic to see you all here. Lovely. Yeah, hello. Yeah,
Thank
fantastic.
you for being here with us, Carol.
My pleasure. It's a wonderful way of teachers getting together from all over the world.
Absolutely. As Russell said a few weeks ago during one of our webinars, this is a weird situation in which we found ourselves in, but we are absolutely grateful for the internet because it does allow, this situation does come in a time where the internet allows us to still gather together in a way and share knowledge. So I see that so many people are here to listen to you. So over to you, Carol, and thank you again for being here with us. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Okay, thank you, Federica, for that lovely introduction. And let me just move forward to the title slide. So what we're looking at then in the next 45 minutes or so is play and games. And play, of course, is an integral part of mainstream early learning programs. It's natural to children, and as fact has been said, it's the work of children. It's the way they find out about the world, the way they develop a whole range of cognitive, social, emotional, and physical skills, and of course, how they learn to communicate. So play enhances children's learning and development, and following the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, Article 31, it is also a children's right. So to start off with then, what's the difference between play and games? And if you'd like to put your ideas in the chat box, it would be wonderful to share some of your ideas. So the difference between play and games. And play, on the one hand, sometimes called make-believe, sometimes called symbolic, free or pretend play. And that is the kind of play where children create imaginary situations in which they take on and act out roles, where play objects are used to represent imaginary ones, and children implicitly follow a set of rules determined by specific roles. And play can be solitary or part of a group. It can be cooperative, constructive, or rough and tumble. And importantly, it's usually child-initiated. And children learn by imitating, experimenting, problem solving, making their own decisions. And a practical example might be playing house with imaginary friends and family. And we can contrast this with games. Games that have rules, okay, that have explicit rules and thinking skills involved in following and applying the rules. And games, as we know, can be competitive or cooperative. And importantly, they need compliance to the rules. If the rules are broken, the game breaks down. And games are also usually adult or teacher-led. So a practical example might be a What's Missing game with flashcards or pictures. So can you tell me now look carefully at those pictures and then tell me now what's missing? What's missing? Let me see in the chat box. Can you remember what's the missing one? Anybody in the chat box? What's the missing picture? Okay, no, it's actually, no, it was the flowers. Yeah, absolutely, fantastic. Okay, so look carefully now, and what's missing? What's missing now? Yeah, the slide. Okay, very good. And the last one, are you ready to tell me, quick as you can, in the chat box, what's missing? The trees. Fantastic. Okay, lovely. So in free play, roles are explicit, but the rules are not. They can be changed and it doesn't upset the play. And in games, the rules are explicit and an important characteristic of the interaction. Following the rules is essential, and initially children often need adult support to do this. For example, learning the rules of a board game before they internalize them and can play independently. So I think, as we can see, play and games are both very different, but they both have an important role in contributing to key developmental goals and building children's early language skills during the pre-primary years. And so what are these key development goals? And what are key development goals in pre-primary? And what I'd like us to do now is to have a brief look at 7 important goals in pre-primary, generally and including English language education. And the first of those goals is symbolic function. And what symbolic function means is essentially the ability to use objects, actions, words, and people to stand for something else. For example, a box can be a house, or you can put on a mask and you're a tiger. And following Vygotsky and social constructivist theories, this paves the way for refining everyday concepts and also learning literacies based on the use of symbols in reading, writing, maths, and music, of course, as well. And children need lots of opportunities to develop symbolic function. Another important developmental goal is the move from children's thinking being dependent on physically manipulating objects or visual images, including letters or numbers, to being able to think inside their heads. That children first of all do a puzzle by physically manipulating the objects. And by the end of preschool, they can manipulate and visualize the objects in their mind. So in kindergarten, the importance of the support of objects and visual images is crucial to enable children to develop the ability to perform the act of abstraction. Another key development goal is the imagination, developing the imagination, or if you like, generative mental activity in which children invent new ways of thinking about all kinds of things. With imagination, things can be changed and manipulated at will to explore possible outcomes and solve real problems and issues. And imagination, of course, is the basis of creative thinking and needs to be opened up rather than shut down by narrower, form-focused work. Our next key goal is self-regulation. And what self-regulation means is the development of children's ability to act in a deliberate, planned manner. In other words, to gradually learn to think before acting and to control their emotions rather than having a tantrum as a toddler does. And self-regulation means that the child can do things with or without the presence of an adult. So it's the beginnings of autonomy and the development of attention and concentration. And our next key development goal is positive values, developing positive values towards yourself, towards others, and towards the environment. And of course, we need to start close to the child's world. Attitudes to do with things like being kind, being helpful, making an effort, being tidy, and so on. Another key development goal is the development of motor skills. And motor skills, gross motor skills, such as learning how to hop, to dance, to coordinate yourself physically, and fine motor skills to do with writing letters and numbers and so on. And that leads to the seventh key development goal that we're talking about. And last but not least, the kind of pre-literacy and pre-academic skills that children need to develop, the focusing attention, concentration, self-regulation, the development of reasoning and cognitive skills, the development of deliberate memory, fine motor skills, and also, of course, symbolic function in the recognition of numbers and letters. So the question is now, how do play and games contribute to these goals? What difference do play and games make? And they make a huge difference, and in rather different ways. So play and games both contribute to the attainment of these goals, and they contribute in terms of cognitive development, language development, and SEL, which stands for social and emotional learning. They also, of course, contribute to the development of physical development and motor skills as well. Let me just highlight a few key ways which also shows how they contribute differently. So make-believe or free play in terms of cognitive development contributes to children's ability to think creatively and flexibly for an extended period, and also contributes to the development of symbolic function, the ability to use things to stand for other things. For example, to pretend a box is a phone, and that symbolic function, which, as we said already, underpins literacy and numeracy development. Games with rules also contribute to cognitive development, but in a rather different way. With games, children learn how to follow instructions, and they also learn specific cognitive skills, such as logical deduction, matching, or memory. In terms of language development, free play offers a context for children to take risks and to use their whole language repertoire, whereas games with rules develop language, but in a way that is much more specific and probably with a focus on the learning of particular vocabulary and structures, and with repeated practice. In terms of social and emotional learning, free play offers opportunities for social development, listening, turn-taking, cooperating, empathy. It also offers opportunities for rehearsal at managing emotions and conflict, and also develops autonomy and responsibility. Games with rules also provide emotional experience, but more to do with resilience if you lose a game, for example, also to do with actually learning to conform to rules and norms, and also learning about the concept of fairness and to accept that. So I think we can see up to this point that both play and games are different, and they both contribute to children's development in important ways. However, in language teaching, there tends to be a focus on teacher-led games rather than child-initiated play. And I think there are a range of understandable reasons for this. First of all, that free play, and I think it's not rocket science to realize this, is much more likely to happen in the mother tongue or the children's shared language. The second reason is that we actually, often with preschool, we have very short lessons, and we feel a need, and quite often pressure sometimes, to focus on direct teaching and input. And another point, and this is a very important one, is that often in free play, some children may get excluded, or they don't want to participate in free play. And so it's much easier for us as teachers to be inclusive and ensure everyone's participation when we're doing teacher-led activities. I think there's also a concern on our part, I know there is on mine, that things may get out of control and be difficult to manage if you allow free play. And the last point here, which is particularly relevant to the situation that all of us are in now, is that free play is actually not possible in an online context, where we may be working and teaching in an online platform such as Zoom, where we have the children present with a parent as well. So before we go any further, I think it would be useful for us to have a look at some different types of games that you can play to keep children engaged, and particularly in an online context. And I'd like us to look at 4 types of games using different resources that you can play. And I think the most important thing is for us all to remember that we know what we're doing in our jobs, and the best way that we can go about adapting to the emergency situation of teaching online is to think of our own face-to-face practice and to adapt what we do from there. So first of all, to have a look then at games we can play using puppets. And I think a really important thing to say is that when we're teaching online, one of the things that's hard and that children miss is the physical presence of their teacher. And a puppet can help you create a warm, effective learning climate. The puppet becomes the children's friend. The puppet has feelings and can be happy, sad, cold, tired, etc. And over the years, I've used all kinds of different puppets, from finger puppets to pencil puppets to oven glove puppets, sock puppets, and they don't need to be sophisticated. The important thing is that the puppet has a name and a personality, and that you make sure that the puppet shows interest and affection in the children. And as well as opening and closing routines, hello songs and so on, you can use the puppet to demonstrate activities and also help you to manage the class. And of course, there are many different games you can play, and you can add some more ideas in the chat box if you like. You can play a game, for example, if you have 3 to 6 flashcards or objects, and the game is guess what the puppet's thinking about, and the children take turns to guess. Or we can play a game correcting the puppet, where the puppet may be very silly and get things wrong. The ball is blue. Oh no, Rosie, or whatever the puppet's called. The ball is red. We can also play games where children follow the puppet's instructions, a bit like the traditional game Simon Says, but you use the puppet's name. Rosie says, wave your arms, please. Rosie says, move your head. And if you don't say please, the children fold their arms and stay still. Or we could also play a game, guess what's in the puppet bag? And we can do that with a bit of rhythm. What's in the bag? Can you guess? It's a book. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So another area of games that we can play with our children when we're working with them online is games with real objects. And actually, one of the very positive things about teaching from home is that it's much easier to get hold of real objects, and you don't have to lug them to school in your bag. And games you can play include, for example, a simple guessing game. So describe one of the objects very simply, and children guess what it is. Are you ready to put your answers in the chat box? You can eat it. It's yellow. So what is it? What is it? Anyone in the chat box? A banana, of course, absolutely. Or we can ask children to bring an object that relates to what they're learning and show it to the class. For example, a toy. This is my car. It's red. Or food. This is a potato. It's brown. Children can also show their items very quickly, and others guess what they are. And of course, what we can also play, one of the oldest games in the world, but always works successfully, and we're going to do this now. So look carefully, please, at all the objects on that tray. And how many can you remember? See if you can put them all in the flat chat box now. How many objects can you remember? Can you put them in the chat box? Come on, what are, yes, lovely, yes, okay, more. Fantastic, can you get them all? Yes, lovely. Okay, so a memory game where we can then get children telling us what's on our tray. Okay, and there, if you want to check your answers, there you are. Okay, and the last area of games that I would like us just to look at briefly is, oh no, the third area, sorry, not the last area, the games with actions. And I think it's important for us to realize that just as in a real classroom, children can't sit in front of a screen for long. And so games with actions give children a physical break. So for example, with this image here, I might say the color and get you to touch the part of the body and name it. So if I go red, you go head. If I go blue, you go arms, and so on. We could also play a Simon Says type game using our puppet, as we talked about earlier, or we might do a cumulative action game that we can also make rhythmic. So for example, we might go, are you ready to do this with me at home? Move your head and your feet. Move your head and your feet and your arms. Move your head and your feet and your arms and your hands, and so on, and get children to do the actions with you. We also might do a magic spell rhyme, and this is where I use my witch puppet, which was in my group photo of puppets earlier, and with my witch I go, abracadabra, listen to me, you're a, and then I turn away, butterfly, 1, 2, 3. And when I turn back, all the children are being butterflies. Okay, so lots of action games we can do that work online and keep our children engaged and learning. And the fourth area that I just wanted us to have a look at, because I think it's so useful, is games using mini whiteboards. Now you can see here that I don't have a real mini whiteboard, and so I've made my own by putting a piece of paper in a plastic envelope, and I put off-white piece of paper so that you would be able to see it on the screen. And then with a non-permanent whiteboard pen, you can draw or write on your whiteboard and clean it off. And of course, the wonderful thing about mini whiteboards is that you can get children involved in doing things during lessons, using manual skills. There's personalization there. There's investment and ownership of learning. So for example, children could draw a picture, for example, a pet they like, or from a story or unit of work. They can then show the class, I like the cat, or they could play a guessing game. Do you like the cat? Yes, I do. No, I don't. You could do a very simple picture dictation where you dictate a picture and perhaps also the colors, if children have different color pens relevant to the story. And it's nice if you have your own whiteboard too and show it to the class with a smiley face or a heart to give positive feedback to children for their efforts. So we can do all these lovely teacher-led games and activities with these children, with our children, but we still need a balance. That from a socio-constructivist point of view, following the work of Vygotsky and others who've come after him, and if any of you out there are familiar with the academic literature on children's play, people such as Bodrova and Moyles and Bruce, it is child-initiated play that is considered essential for children's development and allows them to experiment and internalize thought and language. It is through child-initiated play that children have a chance to explore materials, situations, and use language for themselves. And the opportunities to experiment, take risks, make mistakes, have choices, solve problems, resolve conflicts, and take decisions for themselves help to make them become more autonomous, self-regulating, and responsible. But you may be thinking, and quite understandably, how on earth can we achieve a balance between play and games? And I think that the answer is essentially through the creation of familiar formats. And here I'm very much using and building on the work of Jerome Bruner. And you can read that definition of a format there. I give you a moment to do that. I'm not going to read it out. So formats then are repeated, contextually based, interactive conversations, games, dialogues, routines, and exchanges that we use on a regular basis in class. In fact, it's what we're doing all the time. And through the repetition of formats, children become familiar with the language and procedure involved, such as in the kinds of teacher-led games we've already talked about. And when formats are combined with regular opportunities for free play, children naturally tend to use the familiar language and procedure of the format in their own independent, playful, and creative ways. In other words, all the activities, games, and routines that we use in our lessons over and over again. For example, at some point, we may play a flashcard game like What's Missing with every lexical set we introduce. And actually, rather than being repetitive and boring for children, these provide a model and scaffolding, and in Bruner's terms, and I quote, closely circumscribed formats for children to improvise and develop their own creative versions during free play. And formats consist of, according to Bruner, structures, roles, and a script. And in creating the structure, role, and script of formats, your role as teacher is to be a mediator in engaging children in repeated play-like activities where children join in, memorize, internalize, become completely familiar and confident with, and subsequently use in their own play. That the teacher prepares and equips the children with the language they need for independent play. And when that independent play happens, and this is the arrow there on the bottom, the teacher gets feedback, which feeds in to the evaluation process of their teaching and children's learning. So actually, how do formats work in practice? And in a way, we've seen lots of examples already with all those games that we did earlier, with puppets, with the whiteboards, with real objects, with actions. Because each of those, there's a structure, there are roles, and there's a script. So let's have a look at this a bit more formally here. Here is an action game using the puppet, and the structure. And what Bruner means by this, he says, it's a set of realization rules by which the game is managed. So basically, it's the procedure, what happens. I'm not going to read that out, but you can see it there. And then there are roles. In this case, it's the teacher and puppet who leads, and the children follow. And then there's a script that becomes familiar. Follow, follow, follow me, walk, 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 1, 2, 3, and so on. Okay, so that's one example. Let's have a look at another example now with a feely bag game. Remember, we talked about guessing what's inside the puppet's bag. So you've got the structure there, the procedure, the roles that the teacher and puppet maybe and children take, and then the script. What's in the bag? Can you guess? It's a ball? Yes, yes, yes. Very good, you're right. Okay. And actually, as children become familiar with the game, we might get them to take turns to lead the activity and ask the question themselves. And in Jerome Bruner's terms, this would be employing the handover principle. And this refers to this reciprocal increase in the children's responsibility and involvement in the activity. And it's also a crucial part of the scaffolding process, that children are able to play an increasingly independent role as you withdraw. So actually in our classes, we can offer some degree of handover. And indeed, that's what we're aiming to do as much as possible. We lead at first, and then we want the children to take over. But it actually becomes a different question altogether in terms of how can we provide opportunities for free play? I mean, how can we in our classes? But I think there are 3 options and possibilities depending on our circumstances. And let's have a look at those now and the pros and cons, if you like, of each one. And the first option is English learning areas, or sometimes called English corners. And these are learning centres linked to English that reflect what happens in mainstream pre-primary practice, where you have a reading area, a construction area, a house area, a shop area, where children can choose to interact and play with age-appropriate instructional toys and materials. And an English learning area needs to be resourced with materials that reflect what children have done in class activities with their teacher, even though the playing goes on outside that time. This triggers children's memories and can include things like flashcards, puppet, the story cards, paper and crayons, small picture cards, maybe tablet or with headphones. And an English learning area provides opportunities for children to play and experiment with familiar resources to interact with their peers in an autonomous, child-led way. And actually what happens when you do that, although you're not there to see it, is children will naturally do things like play what's missing with the flashcards with each other, often pretending to be the teacher, and using some English, if not all English. However, there are some problems of English learning areas for language teaching. I mean, first of all, most of us are not the class teacher, and it needs close collaboration with the class teacher and their buy-in, if you like, to the value of having an English learning area. But even if they agree, they may also not speak English, perhaps, or know what to look out for when the children use the English learning area, because they don't know what you've taught the children in terms of the formats and activities that you've done. The other key drawback seems to me that you as the language teacher are not there to be able to observe what happens. And so you don't get the direct feedback on the ways children play and use the language. I think there's also a very practical problem in the sense that, I don't know about you, but I certainly can't leave resources like flashcards or a puppet, etc., in only one classroom, as I only have one set and I need them elsewhere. And of course, if you're working in a private language institute, which some of you may well be, children only come for their lesson and there aren't other opportunities for free play. So a way to solve this is actually through the creation of learning stations, or sometimes called learning hubs, during lessons. And learning stations provide meaningful, self-directed language play for children and develop the same skills such as autonomy, responsible decision-making and cooperation, but during lessons. And a learning station might include, for example, the class puppet and a set of flashcards you've been using, or it might include the story cards from the story you've been telling and small picture cards, or paper and crayons, or tablets and headphones, and so on. Now, in my experience, it's best to start off with just one or two learning stations and add the stations, one new one at a time. And the idea is that children take turns to alternate, for example, completing an activity sheet at their tables in the sort of table time and quiet, focused individual time, to visiting the learning stations you've set up in pairs or small groups. And actually, if you're working with a course book, at the end of each unit, you may like to devote a whole lesson to children taking turns to visit and play at different learning stations. Now, the benefits of this is that as the learning stations are organised during lesson time, they provide you with an opportunity to give extra support to small groups of children who are not at the learning station in turn. And it's important not to interfere with the play going on at the learning stations, but to convey to the children that you're trusting them to play in a responsible way, not sort of have fights and so on, but you can eavesdrop and get feedback on how children play and how they're using the language. But you don't worry at all if they're using their mother tongue or shared language, but you listen out for what they are using in English, which is likely to be all that language surrounding the activities and games that you have played. And in my experience, one of children's favourite games to play at a learning station is basically pretending to be you, the teacher, and playing games like What's Missing, a flashcard game, and saying very good, and actually even correcting each other and being probably much stricter than you are. So the time at the learning stations is obviously limited by the lesson length, but it actually has the same advantages as English learning areas in terms of autonomy, responsibility, and so on. And you can observe how yourself, and I promise you, it is amazing how children tend to replicate activities they've done in class because they've got the prompts available, the puppet, the flashcards they know, and so on. They tend to use language chunks that they've learnt. They also, and this is really fascinating, they tend to correct and help each other. In other words, they're scaffolding each other's learning. And as I mentioned before, in my experience, one of the favourite things that they like doing is playing the teacher and pretending to be children and acting out. However, of course, at the moment, English learning areas and learning stations are both completely impossible because we're working online and we're not in a school context. And even if we were, that kind of close play would not be possible. So at the moment, in the current context, what we need to do, if we can, is to communicate with parents and have positive communication with parents at home so that they can understand the importance of providing children with opportunities for free play on their own or with siblings or with toys. Very often, children play What's Missing with their teddy bear just as easily as with a sibling, to play with the resources that you've used in online lessons. For example, the real objects or the mini-whiteboard or a puppet, even though it's not going to be the same puppet as you have. But I think it's really important, that communication with parents, so that they realise that all the work that you're doing in your teacher-led activities, in your online time, can actually be a springboard for children playing naturally and using some English. And of course, by doing that, they're having opportunities to internalise the language and have ownership of it themselves. So children need repeated exposure to formats in teacher-led activities, games, dialogues, songs, routines, and stories. We've just been talking about playing games this morning, in order to build this confidence and ownership of language and enable free play to happen in a child-initiated way. And children will then at least naturally play in English, partially in their own imaginative kind of ways. So moving towards the end now, let's have a look at what we've looked at. We started this session by talking about the differences between play and games. We looked at 7 key attainment goals in pre-primary. We discussed how play and games contribute to these goals in different ways. We looked at reasons why games predominate in English language teaching, and it's quite natural and understandable and correct in a way that they do, because this is the way that we support and scaffold children's learning and the input becomes their own. We then had a look at games we can use to teach children online using different resources, puppets, real objects, actions, and mini-whiteboards. We discussed the importance of having a balance between play and games. We've talked about how to achieve this through formats. We've looked at examples of how formats work in practice, and we've explored the possible provision of free play through English learning areas or learning stations when we go back to our schools, and indeed, even when we do go back to our schools, I think it's a really good thing to make parents aware of the importance of this as well. So that really brings me to the end of my session. And if you like, as a final message, I would say use a balance of teacher-led activities and games with opportunities for child-initiated play for enjoyable learning and successful results. So thank you very much, everyone, for being there. And if there are any questions that you would like me to answer, then I'll be very happy to do that. The chat box is going so fast, I didn't see the question. There was one that went, but I didn't see it. Are there any questions that you would like me to ask? What are ways to encourage? I missed it. Federica, did you get any of the questions? The chat box is going so fast, I can't see them. Yeah, I can. No, definitely. It's possible to teach online. Yes, I do. Yes. Yeah.
But it says, what are the ways?
Yeah,
So
go
it
on.
says, what are the ways to encourage young learners online? Before they were motivated by stickers, points, stars, and now they're not anymore, of course, because we're teaching online. So how do you motivate your students when teaching online, basically?
Well, I think we have to think from the starting point we have and that we feel confident about, which is our own ability to motivate our children. And even in real classes, stickers and things do it up to a point, but the motivation comes from us. So I think we have to be very careful when we're online to personalize learning, to make sure, for example, things like the kind of online learning routines that we have, maybe for children to bring something at the start of every lesson that they want to show and share with us, so that they feel valued, they feel cared for, they feel that you're interested in them. I think we also need to depending on how we're working in a platform like Zoom, we need to be very careful to actually look at children directly, to use their names a lot, to keep their attention. And I think we also need to make sure that our activities are punctuated by movement and actions, because young children, they just as in the classroom, they can't sit still for very long. They also can't in front of a screen. I think we need to use lots of rhythm, lots of music. So, for example, when we set up a little dialogue, we might actually do it, with percussion and so on. I think we have to use a lot of colour and resources. Anyway, there are a few ideas.
Thank you. So another question that came up, basically, still on this teaching online contingency, was how to integrate learning and socializing for children, in these times in which we can't go and make them meet.
I think that's a really good question, and I think it's obviously quite problematic. And I think it depends at what level of sophistication we're working with our children in terms of our online, whether we're just using Zoom and children are there with a parent, or whether we're also getting them into breakout rooms at any point where there can be a bit more kind of free exchange. I think we can do things like a lot of interactive guessing games and show and tell activities, which of course are not replacing the face-to-face socializing. But I think if we convey, our pleasure at seeing all our students together, and we carry on using the same inclusive classroom, we create, that online social environment and sense of belonging that is really important. And I mentioned during the webinar the key role of a puppet in doing that too.
That is such a great answer, Carol. Thank you. And I think that children do realize when you're actually happy to see them, even if online, that is absolutely, they can feel it. So thank you. And another question that came up. Yeah, absolutely. Another question that came up was, how long do you think is the ideal length of a class online with young learners, considering that their attention span is clearly shorter than an adult's?
I think that's a very good question. And I think it's, in a way, more is often less in terms of online. So I think I would tend to keep sessions short, because that also makes them something that children look forward to. It's always much better to end something when you want more of it than when you've had too much of it. So I would suggest, a balance of synchronous learning and then actually getting children to do things. So can you draw a picture of your 3 favorite foods for next time, so that they go away from the online session motivated to do something in asynchronous time and to bring it back for the next time. So I would not have, I don't want to put a time limit on it, but I wouldn't have too long. But the other thing you have to remember is that sessions, the timing of sessions online is not the same as face-to-face. And so the sessions are going to take longer in the sense of people arriving, you need to greet them, you need to talk to them, you need to find out how they are, their mum and dad probably want to say hello to you as well. So in that sense, they're going to take more time. But I would keep that time shorter rather than longer. Should I involve their parents?
Yeah, I think this links very well to a few questions that we're getting about the involvement of parents. So there's one that's typed, pinned at the top of the chat box, and it says, basically, would it be recommendable to give parents a template in which to insert feedback on the activities that we leave children to do on their own asynchronously? Will parents be able to give feedback in a teacher-friendly way, basically, if we give them a template, that is?
Is that feedback on the activity themselves or feedback on how the children are doing? I mean, I certainly
So,
think,
shall staff, can you specify? Yeah.
yeah, I certainly think it's really important to involve parents. And I think, as we all know, the younger the children are, the more willing parents are to be involved. In fact, you have to measure parental involvement as well, in the sense that you don't want the parents doing the work for the children, but you want them on board with everything that you're doing. And indeed, during the lessons, because with very small children, they're not going to be at screen by themselves, they're going to be with a parent. So you can actually involve the parent in that way. Okay, so show your mum now, your whatever, well, point to your nose, show your mum, you can include interaction with parents in that kind of sense. And I think getting them on board and giving you feedback is also great, but I think you also need to look after yourself, because depending on how many children you teach, if you're getting feedback from 400 parents after every lesson, that's going to be quite difficult to manage. But yes, the principle of involving parents is hugely important. They are, after all, the main motivators of their children. And so you need to work with them in partnership as closely as possible.
Of course. Thank you, Carol. Another question that came up about motivation is how can we motivate children to read when we can't be there with them, when they're learning to read? So you can't just give them a book and expect them to read it. So how to engage with children when they're learning how to read the first letters, the first words, and we can't be with them physically?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I think it's a very difficult thing to do. And I think I would also say that it's important for us not to feel too obsessed, if you like, that our curriculum, the way we work through the curriculum, is not developing in the same way at the moment. We are, we've been put in a situation where we are working in an emergency situation, and so actually perhaps kind of reading is maybe going to be a skill a little bit on the back burner at the moment. On the other hand, there are also things we can do in terms of reading, for example, digital stories that also have text that go with them, that we might get children to read. And actually, reading development also can depend crucially on whether children have parental support at home or not. And some children may be lucky enough to have parents who have a knowledge of English and who are willing to read simple books with their children, and others not. But I would see it as a time where, to kind of actually, for us, for our own mental health as well, to focus on the things we can do and the skills we can most easily develop at this point.
That's great. Thank you, Carol. And I think one last question that we have time for is, I think you already answered, but maybe if you could repeat that. When children start to speak in their own language, how to encourage them to speak in English, and how to react how to react to the fact that they do speak in their native language when they're not native English speakers. when learning sometimes.
Well, I think, do you know something? I think that's absolutely fine and it's completely natural. And I think if as teachers we impose any kind of obligation, all we will succeed in is having a very negative effect on children's motivation. And actually, the key way to involve children is, in a way, I'm repeating my message from the webinar, for us to, play a lot of games and do activities with the children where they become naturally familiar with the language. And some children may only join in with 2 or 3 key words of vocabulary. Okay, so that's fine. That's great, in fact. That every child can be successful at the level they're ready to be. So in terms of production, they may only produce 3 items of vocabulary, but actually they're listening and they're understanding. And so I think what we're really talking about here is a model where you exude warmth and empathy and influence and motivate the children to want to use English rather than any kind of obligation. Because in my experience, any kind of obligation, the barriers go up and children don't want to learn.
That's really a great message, Carol. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. That was a great message.